Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, friends. Welcome to Pastors of Pain. I'm Father Brian O'Brien, pastor of St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church here in Stillwater, Oklahoma. And we are so glad that you are with us. The weather is nice. The football team, as of this recording, is 3-0 and ranked. So anyway, all is right in Stillwater, I guess, if you include those two things. But anyway, the other great thing is that in the Catholic world, we are ready to welcome a bunch of Afghans to Stillwater. That may be a whole nother episode. But today, I'm joined for the second time, not by Father Carey, but by Deacon Tom Cabeen. Deacon Tom, welcome back.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So Deacon Tom was on the show back in, I think it was late May, and he shared his story of his conversion. He was, grew up in the Jehovah's Witnesses and then became a Catholic, and then that's where we ended. It was like a cliffhanger. And actually, there were several people that wrote in, several of you who listened and said, well, when's he coming back? Like we gotta finish the story. So I would recommend going back and listening to that. So it was kind of late May, and hearing Deacon Tom's conversion story, which has been told kind of in many different places. So just recently, tell us. So you were on EWTN back in 2015, I think it was?
2008.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, a long time ago.
So that was before you were a deacon. You had recently converted.
Before I was a deacon. In fact, I was a recent convert. I'd have been a Catholic for only about 2 years at that time.
Oh my gosh, wow. So you can Google that, EWTN. The show is called The Journey Home, and you can look up Tom Cabeen. But then recently, you were on a podcast. Tell us about that. It was in August.
It was in late August.
National thing.
One of my friends who came from the same parish where I came from before I moved to Stillwater in Milford, Connecticut, has a podcast called Catholic Truth. His name is Brian Mercier, and he is an apologist, and he takes on all different kinds of objections to the Catholic faith or other groups that have various positions with regard to the Catholic faith. And he asked me to come on and make a podcast and a video with him. We did that late in August, and about a week later he said, "What's going on, Tom? You got 25,000 views already."
Wow.
So we're
Praise God, that's beautiful.
Close to 45,000 views now at this point. I didn't check it in the last few days, but we were at almost 44 last week.
And so then when you do something like that, I mean, our podcast compared to that is, small pickings, small time. But when you did the EWTN show, when you did this Catholic Truth National podcast, and then you hear from people.
I do.
So you don't have like an official, ministry.
I really don't. I don't have a web page. I don't have any kind of.
You.
They do, and I don't really know how they do it. But
and who are they? Like who hears that story and then reaches out to you for guidance?
I've had a number of people call, and a lot of people find me online. There's really quite a bit of information. In the tiny little world of former Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm fairly well known, so it's not hard to find me if you just type in Tom Cabeen into Google search.
Sure.
And you'll find a lot of things that would lead you to me. Many of them responded to the YouTube video, the comments in there. I got several emails or phone calls from people, and I've talked with them. I'm talking with about 5 different people now. One from Australia, one from Mexico, one from Ireland, one from about 3 from the United States.
Wow.
And they're interested in becoming Catholics, or at least they're interested in why a former Jehovah's Witness would become a Catholic.
Sure.
The great thing about the Catholic Church, which I've been doing this for many, many years, trying to help people leave the witnesses. But the problem is I never had any place to send them. Now,
before you were a Catholic.
Before I was a Catholic.
Because you were still very much
basically,
searching.
I was searching as
for
well.
a home.
And I had actually found a home for a while, and then it turned out that wasn't really going to be my final home.
And you shared that last time, and kind of going from
witnesses to the
Baptist,
evangelical Baptist church,
to Episcopalian.
the Episcopalian, and then as an Episcopal church, I discovered the Catholic Catechism.
Yeah, and liturgies. I remember you saying that.
And the liturgy, and I had many. I had given a class in the history of the church when I was in the Baptist church, and I had read a lot of the early church fathers, but I sort of thought that faith just disappeared. I didn't know it was still around, and I never entered my mind to look at the Catholic Church to see if it was there. So anyway, I think we kind of left off the last time I had entered the Catholic Church.
You had become a Catholic,
but my appetite was whetted for learning. And I learned so many things. I was like
a reader.
A kid in a candy store when I became a
and
Catholic.
And still to this day, I mean,
I am. I love to find out about the world around me. I really do. I want to know what is true and what I define by truth.
What is truth? Yeah.
When my idea of the world around corresponds to what's actually there. And what that means is you have to have your mind open, and you have to know where to get good information, reliable information. And that had been one of my big problems. When I became a Catholic, I found a source of information that was reliable. It had been around for a long time, and it had stood the test of time.
Yeah. Yep.
That way, I knew that it wasn't just something that somebody had come up with. As a Jehovah's Witness, I had always been taught that philosophy was just men's ideas, just something that somebody had pulled out of their head and taught as if it were true. Mm-hmm. But I found out that philosophy was not like that philosophy was a love of wisdom which moved ancient people to search for what the world was really like. And unlike science, which confines itself to that which can be empirically tested in a laboratory and having to do with the physical world, philosophy takes on those things that are not physical, things that are metaphysical, or in Aristotle's words, beyond physics. That is, ideas like truth and beauty and goodness and justice and things like that can be taken on in the world of philosophy. Now, I always believed that the Catholic Church had started out in a Jewish environment, which it did. Sure. And the church that we read about in the New Testament is very closely tied to the Old Testament, the Jewish world. And I thought that the 2nd and 3rd century Christians who relied very heavily on Greek philosophy, that this represented a corruption of the faith. I didn't realize at the time that it did no such thing.
Yeah, there's a unity there.
And not only is it a unity, but when the preaching of the gospel expanded beyond the world of Jews and people who associated with Jews, like the Ethiopian eunuch or Cornelius.
Yeah, from Acts of the Apostles. Yeah.
Right, from described in the Acts of the Apostles. These guys had been coming to Jewish synagogues. They were called God-fearing men by the Jews. But once you got outside of that world, the Bible had no authority for people. So you had to approach them in a different way, on a source of authority, using a source of authority that they would recognize and they would respect. And you see that in chapter, is it 20 of Acts, or maybe 16, where St. Paul talks to the people in Athens. He talks to them appealing to the Greek poets. He doesn't appeal to the Hebrew scriptures like he does when he talks to people in other places, because that would be something that they would recognize as an authoritative source. Is it 17?
Maybe
I believe
Acts
it's 17. Yes,
Paul in the Areopagus.
In the Areopagus, that's right.
Yep.
So this expanded my mind, and I realized I was quite surprised to see that the early Christians viewed that anyone who went searching for what is true because we're all God's children.
Yep.
God would reveal it to them. He didn't hide it and give it only to the Jews, but Greeks too could
kind of
find
that
truth.
Gnosticism, that there's this special group of people that have this certain kind of knowledge and only they get it. And if you're lucky, they'll tell you about it.
Right.
That God's truth is available to everyone.
To anyone who searches for it. Mm-hmm. That's almost what we would have to have if Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. If he
but only
loves
for
us
this
all,
really small group of people.
Right,
no,
exactly.
No,
it's for everybody.
Yeah.
So that changed my whole perspective, and that's what sort of led me into the Catholic faith.
Wow.
I became sort of obsessed with learning as much as I could about every discipline because I felt like I'd been left out. I'd never even
You had to make up for lost time.
Right, I really did. And as I did, I found within the Catholic faith a treasure house of wonderful teachings that explained the faith, the Catholic faith, but also the whole world around me. Because again, if God created the whole world, everything has to fit together. And particularly in the teachings of Thomas Aquinas, faith and reason fit together like a glove.
So Thomas Aquinas, 13th century Dominican.
That's correct.
Prolific writer.
And one of the great...
Still read widely today.
Exactly.
Heavily influential in the church today.
Exactly. And I had become a student of the writings of a man named Mortimer Adler. Mortimer Adler was a famous 20th century philosopher, worked in the philosophy department at Columbia University and University of Chicago, and the founder of the Great Books program. And later he became the general editor of the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
So here's a guy who knows a lot about a lot of things and was capable of putting all these things together. He was so impressed with Thomas Aquinas that he became a Christian. He had been an atheist. He was Jewish, and he died a Catholic.
Praise God.
And when I saw this story and so many others that were so conversion stories are such a powerful way to learn about something that you don't know anything about. And conversion stories like G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, people, I mean, even Augustine in his Confessions.
Oh, yeah, 4th century.
Is a great conversion story. John Henry Newman, and then many, many contemporary 20th century conversion stories. Sure. And so as I read these, I learned more and more about it. Now, I'm in the church now. I'm learning, and I want to expand my understanding of the truth. And so I have, my son is in graduate school, and he is a pal with this gentleman who is in his college, Saybrook College, in his school. And he went, just go running with him, and we would have lunch together. Well, we found out when we became Catholics that this man was a Catholic bishop. And he was a good friend of Matt's, and he and I became good friends. And he suggested to me that I think about becoming a deacon. And I think I explained in my last podcast that what drew me to the church more than anything else was Jesus' statement in John chapter 6 about the bread of life, that unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you.
Pretty definitive.
And I became convinced that throughout the centuries, this had meant that Christians understood this to mean that you actually had to take Jesus' flesh and blood. And that came from a church whose priests were in apostolic succession, that it was more than just believing that it's the body and blood of Christ. It became the body and blood of Christ because it was transformed, that it was confected by someone who had been given the authority to confect it.
Yeah, not just anybody.
It couldn't be just anybody.
Yep.
It had to be someone who was in who had been ordained by someone in succession from the apostles. It was passed down by physical contact. Amazing.
The laying on of hands.
Yes, exactly. And when I began to think about becoming a deacon. I didn't come to the church to be a deacon, but I have been involved in ministry all my life. And I thought I was in my late 50s at that time, and I'm kind of getting too old to do this. So I thought, well, I will find out about it. I went to an informational meeting, and I put in an application. I thought, if it's God's will that I do this,
let it be done unto me, according to your will.
Yeah. Exactly. So I was accepted into the class, and then we went through a year of aspirancy in which you discern whether you really have the call for this. One thing I was quite impressed with, I had been asked a few times to be a deacon in the evangelical Protestant churches. And it was basically the pastor coming to my house and saying, hey, would you like to be a deacon? Kind of like, would you like to mow my lawn?
Yeah.
There was no real...
Not a lot of, like, no formation.
There was no formation. But
yeah.
I was impressed and greatly impressed by how seriously the Catholic Church takes
a multi-year
all of this. It takes many years.
Process.
And we go through point after point after point. Before we're ordained, we go through the training. And believe it or not, this is one of the things that impressed me almost the most was at the very beginning, because of the church's recognition of the sanctity of marriage, the first thing that happens is your wife has to say yes. So,
this is not I'm going to do this on the side,
right.
And I don't care what my wife says. It's
they respect the relationship between husband and wife.
Yeah, marriage is your
marriage is my first vocation. So I went through the process. I was made a lector, an acolyte.
Those kind of steps along the way.
way. And each one of these steps had really serious words said. The rite is serious, and we move on because they took every step of this, so that even though as a deacon, it isn't like I have great authority in the church, I'm allowed to read the gospel.
But you're a cleric. I mean,
That's right.
It's in the hierarchy, right? Bishops, priests, and deacons.
That's right. It's ancient. It's ancient, but it's taken very seriously. And that's the beautiful thing, that in the Catholic Church, even reading the gospel at the Sunday Mass is considered to be something only to be done by someone who's truly had formation.
By a deacon or a priest.
By a deacon or a priest.
Yeah. Well, let me back up a little bit. So just a little bit about the what we would call the ministry of deacon, the diaconate. So let me point to sort of two sources. One is from the Acts of the Apostles. So this is not something we sort of made up, right? This is Acts of the Apostles chapter 6, and it says, at that time, as the number of disciples continued to grow, the Hellenists complained against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. So the 12 called together the community of the disciples and said, it is not right for us to neglect the word of God to serve at table. Brothers, select from among you 7 reputable men filled with the Spirit and wisdom, whom we shall appoint to this task, whereas we shall devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word. So the 12 were those first apostles. I mean, the apostles were priests and bishops. And they recognized, oh man, we can't cover all this ground ourselves. And so let's have the priests dedicated mostly to prayer and to the teaching of the word. But then we have all these people in need. And so let's start something new. The proposal was acceptable to the whole community, so they chose Stephen, a man filled with faith in the Holy Spirit, also Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicholas of Antioch, a convert to Judaism. They presented these men to the apostles, who prayed and laid hands on them. The word of God continued to spread, and the number of the disciples in Jerusalem increased greatly. Even a large group of priests were becoming obedient to the faith. So those were the first deacons, those original 7, Acts of the Apostles, chapter 6.
That's right. And the deacons, the word deacon comes from the Greek word diakonos, which is just meant a house servant.
Yeah.
Someone who
serves.
Who serves. That's what service is all about. And that's why being a deacon is not for people who are looking for adulation or recognition. It's really an opportunity, an ordination to serve others. Because Jesus himself said, you call me God, you call me Lord, and rightly so, because I am. But he says, I'm here among you as a servant. And on another occasion, he says, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And that changes our whole perspective, that to be great in the kingdom of heaven, we have to serve others. And the diaconate gives a lot of opportunities to do that. Again, I say, if you're looking for recognition and praise, don't go for the diaconate.
Choose something else. So, in how this plays out here in Stillwater, we're very blessed with 4 deacons. Deacon Tom is one, Deacon Paul Govek, Deacon Bart Brashears, Deacon Glenn Collum. And each of you bring different gifts. I think we talked about last time, your ability to speak Spanish, you're a good preacher and teacher. Each one, I think of like Deacon Glenn, who does pre-COVID did a lot of prison ministry, but I also know that all 4 of you are visiting people in their homes and nursing homes, counseling. You guys run our baptism class, help with marriage preparation, and then certainly on Sundays preaching. The setup and takedown of Mass, blessing people, baptizing. So, all of these kind of tasks that are, and then, of course, service to the poor, reaching out to those in need. Right. When people come and need counsel, need resources, that's what deacons do. And it's just so, for me, I think we'd be in big trouble without the 4 of you and all that you do so often behind the scenes, stuff people never see, but is so important to the life of the parish.
Well, I consider it an enormous honor to serve with these other men. They are wonderful, and all of them have been Catholics a lot longer than I have. What's
interesting, 3 of the 4 of you are converts.
It is interesting.
Bart, Glenn, and you.
See, we're increasing the numbers. In Acts, there was only 1 who was a convert.
And here, 75% of our deacons are converts to Catholicism. And Paul Govek has been a Catholic his whole life growing up in Wisconsin. So I think that's an interesting little
yes, it is.
thing right there.
It is. In fact, I think right now in the church, converts are doing a tremendous ministry in terms of helping others, because we can talk to non-Catholics in a way that Catholics cannot. Now, I have a particular ministry toward former Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm very well qualified to do that, because Jehovah's Witnesses are largely misunderstood by just about everybody.
Before I met you, you're like the first. I had not had a lot of interaction. You've taught me a tremendous amount.
And they believe such weird things that, but there it is, that it's hard for somebody who was raised a Catholic even to understand the mentality behind it.
Yeah.
But I've been able to help, probably 2-3 dozen former witnesses to become Catholics. And they're good Catholics as well.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate this ministry, and I appreciate the opportunities that I have here. I meet on Tuesdays with a group of men. I believe that this is a great need in the church right now, and that is for men to feel more comfortable sharing their faith and becoming strong within the context of a church, the church family. For some reason, many men feel like it's kind of not a manly thing, that church is for the women.
Right.
But we have a group of very strong and spiritual men in this community, and we're trying to grow it. And we're trying to get them to think about the diaconate as well.
So we have an informational meeting coming up. So in the Diocese of Tulsa, so we're in the Diocese of Tulsa, we have, I don't know, probably 60, 70 men who are deacons already, 4 of them who serve here in Stillwater. But there's always the need, similar to the priesthood, to replenish those vocations. Deacons get older, deacons retire, deacons die. And so who is that next generation of deacons who will come in and serve? So we're actually going to have an informational meeting here in Stillwater on Saturday, October 24th at 6 o'clock at the rectory. So Father Robert and I are going to host, and the deacons will be there. And what we're looking for, it's just people, any man in the parish who's interested in learning more. Coming to the meeting doesn't make you a deacon. Coming to the meeting, right? It's a formation process over multiple years. But it's just a chance to get questions answered. We also want spouses to come. So if you have a spouse, they ought to come if they're able to come, because, as you said earlier, it involves, it's not just the man making the decision, but if he has a spouse, she has to be involved. Could you just talk about that? We just have a couple minutes, but when you and Gloria sat down, what was that like?
We talked about what it's like to be in service. Of course, I had been, as I say, in ministry for most of my life. In my past, I had, I think, gotten too involved in it. This is always something that you have in other contexts besides the Catholic context, that you're made to feel like you need to do things even if they shortchange your wife and family. We talked about what was involved, and we thought about it and prayed about it, and that's a very important part of the whole process, is praying about it and thinking about it, discerning. And so my wife is very much on board. At the same time, she's not a deacon, so she doesn't feel like she has to be involved in everything that I'm involved in. But she understands that there's times when I need to do things, and so we've settled into a very comfortable relationship with regard to how this works. And it's different for every deacon, because marriage relationships are
what
different.
And what are your family commitments, work commitments? So I think a lot of guys, I think it's harder when your kids are younger, because in our formation program here in the Diocese of Tulsa, it's one weekend a month, almost like the National Guard, right? One weekend a month for I don't know what it's going to look like this time, but for 5 years. And so, are you in a position, kind of financially, family-wise, work-wise, other commitments in the community, are you in a position to do that? And so for some, they're at a time of life, kind of a season of life where, there is that available time. I think guys with younger kids, they do it. I mean, that we have deacons that have young kids, but that's a conversation. What you don't want is sort of resentment in your marriage and choosing the diaconate over your wife. And so that's where this discernment comes in. That's so important. Anyway, so this meeting that's coming up on the 24th will just be a kind of a starting process of that. And then for those who wish to go forward, there'll be there's an application process, kind of this aspirancy year that you talked about, because it's kind of a two-sided thing too. It's not just I want to be a deacon and therefore I get to become a deacon. It's similar to marriage. You did not walk up to your wife and say, you will be my wife. She has to say, I want to be your husband, So the same thing happens in the diaconate. It's the diocese saying, we choose you, and you saying to the diocese, I choose you.
And one
two-way street.
And one thing to know, they're going to do a complete background check with the recent history of the church. They're going to look at everything to make sure that you don't have anything that would
psychological evaluation,
and then you're going to be asked to
poked and prodded,
study very seriously. We went through the entire catechism and talked about it.
Yep, philosophy, theology.
But what a wonderful opportunity it is to truly learn the faith. So I strongly recommend any man who might have that life opportunity to do that.
Great. I would just, for further reading, so Acts of the Apostles, chapter 6, and then in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraphs 1569, 1570, 1571 speak specifically to the ministry of the deacon. That's our time. Deacon Tom, thank you.
Thank you so much for the
being
invitation.
on the show. And if you have any questions, give us a call. Pray for us. We're praying for you. Thanks for listening. God bless. Have a great week.